This is Dr. Salmon, and I'm meeting with him for psychological well-being. Um, so how do you think psychology paired with exercise can improve a person's well-being?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for doing this. It's a pleasure. And this is a really interesting area. It's one that I do a lot of work in, and I think about a great deal. I think the combination of exercise and psychology makes a lot of sense because I think what psychology brings to this has to do with things like motivation and interest. And I also think it helps people put exercise in a kind of a broader framework than just exercise is something you do because people say it's good for you. I basically believe that we all have a kind of an innate capacity to be active, physically active, and if we're not, I think that can I think it can have negative effects on our health and our attitude and everything else. So I believe that many of the conditions that people are treated for, including things like stress, depression, anxiety, um, some of them may have other causes, but one of the major causes of these conditions, I think, is inactivity. As a species, we're so well equipped when you think of all the things that we can do. And the fact is that many people just become very sedentary. And once the body starts to shut down, then I think the mind kind of follows.
Absolutely. For someone who has anxiety or depression, how does it affect the overall body and mind?
I think that conditions like anxiety and depression and stress, for one thing, they're tremendous barriers to being involved in life. When somebody's anxious or depressed, they often get very preoccupied, very concerned, and focused on how bad they feel. And as a result of that, they miss out a lot on what's going on right around them. If somebody's depressed, it's really, you can't just say, well, you should cheer up and so forth, because it just doesn't make much of an impact. So these conditions, in some ways, can have some meaning, but I think they rob people of a sense of really enjoying life and being engaged in life. What I mean by adaptive aspects, anxiety up to a certain point is not necessarily a bad thing because it's related to the body's alarm system, and sometimes it's really useful, and even it could even save your life. I mean, if you were anxious because something was happening or you had to escape from like a dangerous situation, that kind of physiological activation could be really helpful. With depression, that might not seem as obvious, but sometimes, for example, athletes become depressed, and it's the body's way of signaling to them that they're overdoing it because they're overtraining. Things like infections, stress fractures, and so forth often develop, and sometimes athletes will try to push through that, and then at some point they start getting a little depressed. And my belief is that it's sort of the body's wisdom of saying, we have to slow things down here, we're doing too much. So in that sense, there may be certain adaptive aspects to these conditions, but when they become extreme, that's when life seems to just be really, really stressful.
Being an athlete myself, I remember pushing myself to a limit and
really experiencing something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of, now that I'm looking back on it, it's like, hey, you probably should have slowed down.
You should have slowed down.
Yeah.
Your body was telling you something you needed to hear.
It was, but you never want to listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
How would you suggest using exercise in a healing aspect for these negative effects?
Okay. I think that being physically active could be part of an overall way of helping manage anxiety and depression. When you talk about healing, I think the important thing is to, anything that you do it gradually and with a sense of care and compassion for yourself. It's not like trying to get yourself out of depression or not be anxious, but more in a kind of gentle, exploratory way. Maybe start walking, but do something, do a little bit, but not make excessive demands on yourself, either on your mind or body, because if you do that, you're just probably going to prolong whatever condition it is you're trying to heal. I think, and I also think the concept of healing strongly implies a sense of being gentle and compassionate. People, especially athletes, you mentioned you're an athlete, but athletes often drive themselves very, very hard and push themselves, and when they reach a limit, they say, "Oh, I can keep going, I can push through." But if you're trying to heal up from a condition, it would be like if you broke your leg. You wouldn't go out and start running on a treadmill. You would take a lot of time and let nature start the healing process, and then do things that can sort of amplify that effect.
Yeah, thank you. What are some long-term or short-term effects on anxiety and depression when using exercise as a therapy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So long and short-term effects. Well, once people start becoming active, it does a couple of things. For one thing, people who are depressed and anxious often pull away from social contact with other people. Sort of withdraw, get quiet. So once you start becoming active, just a simple effect of that is that it puts you out in the world, and people start making connections. Maybe you reconnect with friends or people that you've exercised with in the past. You feel more energy, you feel more like doing things, and the more you feel like doing things, the more engaged and connected you become. And also it makes it more likely that things that you'll encounter, people or opportunities or situations, that themselves will have healing effects. You might, for example, starting to exercise after or as working with a bout of depression, you might start going for walks in a park, and you might encounter like animals or pets or people, and just that kind of the richness of that environment could be really beneficial, and that's a natural byproduct of being active. Not to mention the fact that biologically, physical activity and exercise boost certain brain chemicals, neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, GABA. So they're real demonstrable effects on how the brain works. Brain blood flow is improved, metabolism is improved. So they're both psychological and biological effects that are very positive.
What does it mean to you to have mental hardiness?
Hardiness, so yeah, there's a researcher, a psychologist named Suzanne Kobasa, who did a lot of work on hardiness, and she was interested in. Well, you asked me what I think about it, but I just want to say that some of what I think is influenced by previous research. What she found, she actually worked with, studied business executives who seemed to really thrive on stress. It was like the busier they were, the more they were doing, the more they seemed to be kind of happy and well adjusted. And she came up with the concept of hardiness that involved three elements. One was that she found that these were people who were committed to what they were doing, really interested. In other words, not just dragging themselves to work, but they really enjoyed it. They were challenged by what they were doing, and by challenged meaning they weren't overloaded with expectations. They had the tools and the resources that they needed. And then the third part was that they had a sense of control. So commitment, challenge, and control. Meaning that they had some way of regulating what they did or what was happening on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure you're aware that, like if you could work in the kind of a job where you don't know from one day to the next what's going to happen. Somebody could walk in and fire you, or just come in and say, well, today we're going to have you do something entirely different. You have no control over the situation. And the other word that comes to mind is resilience, and that, to me, that means an ability to kind of roll with the punches. I mean, everybody's life is stressful to one degree or another, but people who are resilient seem to somehow find ways to act skillfully in situations that would really, I don't know, just really be very, very challenging. I'm thinking of people, for example, concentration camp survivors. Um, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who wrote a book. It was called Man's Search for Meaning, and it was all about people who lived under incredible conditions of deprivation in concentration camps during World War II, including himself. And he survived it, and he wrote about it, and he was endlessly fascinated in how some people were able to just deal with horrendous conditions of deprivation, even torture, and so forth. And later, an Israeli psychologist named Aaron Antonovsky started doing research on survivors of concentration camps, and he kind of used that word resilience as a way of just characterizing how remarkable people were who had that capacity. So I think it's an ability to not just survive, but to even thrive on the challenges that life throws at us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been through a couple of hurdles myself.
Really?
But yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then you've come out the other side.
Yeah.
That's important.
You gotta smile through it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a waitress now in a restaurant, a busy restaurant too. So some people are happy and some are not, and you just gotta do the best you can. What are some characteristics of a person that would make them more mentally hardy?
Characteristics. I think one. Well, just some background on this one. I'm very interested in doing a lot of practice in what's called mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. And what that's all about is learning to be where you are with circumstances the way they are, even if it's something unpleasant, but being able to be focused and as best you can, not being too judgmental about it. So a specific example of this, yesterday I was in my office, I was getting ready to give a talk, and I had planned to borrow my wife's car to go to the place where I was giving this talk, and I had everything planned out. Everything worked out. I knew what I was going to talk about. I'd done all my homework, and I even had borrowed the key for the car, so I knew that wasn't going to be a problem. And I walked out to the parking lot, put my key in the lock, and the car, it was just like it just went ballistic. The alarm went off, the lights went on and off. And, it's an example of a kind of little, to me, in a way, it was, it turned out to be not a really big deal, but I could see where I could get really upset about something like that. And I think where mindfulness comes into play, that helped me was to say, all right, so the alarm is going off in the car. I mean, is that such a terrible thing? So I had the presence of mind to figure out, well, obviously I've got the wrong key. My wife is also a professor, by the way, Professor Anna Reese. And so I found my way to her classroom, got the right key, and came back, and then went and gave my talk. But, things like this happen. You make plans, you have intentions, and then something happens in the middle of it. And in these kind of circumstances, I think you can really help yourself a lot by just not elaborating, not creating a lot of added drama, not getting, so kind of, oh, this is horrible, this is awful, this is terrible. Just saying, okay, things are the way they are. Just figure it out.
Yeah. One way I feel like in my life that happens is my mom. Anytime we're in a car or something like that, and something, we have to stop suddenly. She'll go, very quickly. And I'm just it's okay. It's like,
great.
Everything's okay. And she very quickly gasps.
Sure. Yeah.
And throws me off completely.
Well, and then, what's important here is that these kinds of things can add up. You do it here, you do it there, and pretty soon you're just really feeling stressed out. So mindfulness can kind of help bring you back down more into the present moment.
Yeah.
Good.
So I'm trying to work on as a person as being more in the moment. So I'm always in the future thinking.
Future, past.
Yeah.
Good.
When someone makes up a lot of reasons or excuses to not work out, what are the most common ones that you think you hear?
The most common one is I don't have enough time. I hear that all the time. I can't go someplace to work out. I don't have access to facilities or opportunities. Um, Cost, expense. I'd have to pay. I can't afford a gym membership. I have other priorities. I'll do it later, maybe, but right now there's so many things going on in my life. And one thing too is I think people have an image of working out as something you have to go someplace to do in a very regimented way. So the idea of working out means I have to be on an elliptical machine or a treadmill or something. You really don't. All you have to do is put on your shoes and go out and walk around. And I think people miss that a lot. One of the funniest things to me is when somebody will get in their car and drive 5 miles to a fitness center and then walk on a treadmill for 45 minutes. I mean, we do that stuff all the time, and it's like you don't have to go to great lengths to be active, but certainly time is a big factor. But I can tell you this, that there's more and more research coming out now showing that if you're really kind of opportunistic about it, like every hour or half hour or so, get up and do something. Go and walk. I have a timer here on my desk, see it's set for 30 minutes. And pretty much anytime when I come in, I just start the timer. 30 minutes comes along. I get up and I walk from here down to the end of the hall, and I'll do a couple of yoga, positions or something like that. Walk back, and it's just like it's better than coffee or anything else. My energy is back. I'm more focused. So the idea of not having enough time, I just say, well, look, you probably could find little moments here and there, but that's one of the most common.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are some small exercises that an average person can make to be of sound body and mind?
Small. When you say small, what are you thinking?
Something simple like that, like finding ways to incorporate it into your day.
Sure.
Maybe a little easier to find little increments of time when you don't have time.
Well, I mean that's a perfect example. If you're at a desk, you're working in an area. Most people can get up and walk around. That's probably the simplest thing to do. I like to add in things like stretching, a little bit of yoga, nothing major, but just something that will take 3 or 4 minutes. And it doesn't mean you have to work out for a half hour or anything like that. Small little increments like that can help a great deal. They're finding now, which is kind of interesting, that if you were to take little 5-minute activity bouts throughout the course of the day, that will be almost for most people as much value as going to a gym and working out for a half hour or so. In terms of current recommendations from American College of Sports Medicine, they recommend that most people figure out how to be active for a half hour a day. That's 30. If you can figure out 30 minutes a day, that's it. And you can do that in 5 or 10 minute bouts. It's really not all that much when you think about 23 and a half hours. So I think break it down into little segments and string them together during the day is a great way to kind of meet that objective.
Is there anything else that you think is important as an aspect for psychological well-being that would be beneficial to a class in terms of exercise?
In terms of exercise, yeah, I think what I would probably say is don't get too hung up on exercise itself. I like to talk more about movement. I like to talk about mindfulness, about learning to move mindfully. I think sometimes exercise, people have sometimes extreme ideas about exercise. In the same way that people who meditate often have extreme ideas, like if I say to somebody, well, what do you think meditation is all about? And they'll say something like, that would be like Buddhist monks sitting in a monastery in Tibet and just staring at a wall for like hours and hours a day. And I mean, while it's true that there are people who do that, that's not something that you or I would want to do or would be capable of doing. but similarly, people often have kind of extreme ideas about what it means to be active, or what you need to do to be active, and it's really not all that much. I mean, your body will be so responsive to anything you do. So I think encouraging people to be kind and compassionate toward themselves is really important. And also take time to explore movement in a mindful way. Like in meditation centers, they have meditation pathways. They don't go anywhere. It would be like a circle, and you would just walk on the circle and just get into the experience of putting one foot in front of the other and really bringing your attention into the present moment. Because most of the time when we're moving, we want to get somewhere. And movement is very functional. You're walking to class, you're walking here, you're running there, or you're running to get in shape or to be fit. So what I would say, just as somewhat of an alternative, is to say, treat movement as something that is valuable in and of itself, as an amazing capability that we possess as a species. One of the assignments for my class in exercise psychology is to figure out how you walk. It's just like, how do you do this incredible thing? Like, how are you able to take one step and then the other? What's going on in your body? So, how do you shift your balance? How do you navigate your way? What do you look at? Because this is something we just do automatically, and I think for people who are physically inactive and so forth, I can often get them fascinated by things like that. And I think exercise is great. I don't mean to in any way disparage it. Physical activity is great, but also take some time in addition to that to focus on these really what are amazing capabilities we have, but oftentimes don't appreciate. One illustration of that is this device up on Mars, the Martian lander. I don't know the name of it, but do you know offhand what it is? So they put it up there, and so when they landed it, it's this incredibly sophisticated device. Kind of rolls along the Martian surface, and they have video cameras, and they're getting feedback here on Earth from it. So it's making its way towards a crater, and at some point, and it's moving very, very slowly, like just maybe a foot a minute or something like that. So at some point, they see a rock coming up in its path, and maybe even a small boulder, and then it's like, oh my gosh, how is this thing going to get over the boulder? And then somehow, because it's got all these articulated wheels and sophisticated suspension system, it makes it over, and everybody is going, oh, great, it got over this obstacle. But that's something you and I can do. We don't even think about it. You're walking out someplace, you're walking along a path, and here's an obstacle like a tree root or a stone or a rock. You just walk over it. It's like, wow. But just pause long enough to say, isn't that amazing that we can do that? But we've been doing it for so long, it's become a habit we don't even appreciate. So
that you appreciate a little baby's first steps.
You appreciate everything. You just have a sense of not just appreciation but gratitude for these amazing. We're so well adapted to living on the earth. It's amazing. But I think we sort of take that for granted. So in addition to exercise and everything else, people exercise because they want to get somewhere else. They want to get into shape. They want to be healthier than they are. But take time just to value and take joy and pleasure in what you can do right now.
Thank you so
Is
much.
that it?
Yes,
oh,
that's
okay,
all.
great. Well, you're a wonderful interviewer.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If you don't mind, can you just click it one more time?
Yeah.